Hey everyone, welcome to CS Batman. Today we are going to talk about how to start coding. More specifically, what is code? In this video, you will learn about what is code and how the coding process will look like. The first part, what is code? Let's imagine that you have a coffee machine right here. Is the coffee machine has anything to do with coding? Yes, of course. Just imagine if there is no code written for this coffee machine. Will it work or will it not work? The answer is very simple. If there is no code written for this machine, this coffee machine will be just as useless as a piece of metal crabs. Because no matter how sophisticated the electronic components or the electronic hardwares the coffee machine can have, if there is no code written to it, it will never be able to brew a cup of coffee. That's why it's useless. For example, if there is no code written for these coffee machines, whenever this button is pressed, the coffee machine couldn't boil the water. When this button is being pressed, the coffee machine just couldn't dispense the water. So what is the use of this coffee machine, right? It can do literally nothing. Why is this happening? What is the reason behind this not working coffee machine? The reason is simple. Because the coffee machine have no idea what to do. The coffee machine have no idea what to do when this button is pressed or when this button is pressed. So our challenge is, how are we going to make this coffee machine work again? Very straightforward, using the code. Because the code is the instruction for machine to do stuff. Whenever we want a machine to do something for us, we write codes for them. In this case, whenever this button is being pressed, we want the machine to boil the water, for example. To make this machine work, we have to write code to boil the water. When this button is pressed, we want the coffee machine to dispense the water. So we need to write code to dispense the water. Recap, code is the instruction for machine to do stuff. Whenever we want the machine to do something for us, we have to write codes for them first. But how do we do it? How is the coding process looks like? A better way to frame this question is how to give instruction to the machine. Before that, let us just imagine that you want to give the Spider-Man an instruction to tell him what to do. You first get a piece of paper, and then you write some instructions in English on that piece of paper. Then you pass that paper to the Spider-Man. The Spider-Man will read your instruction and he executes your instruction. Finally, you get a Spider-Man in action, all according to your instructions. Similarly, to give instructions to the coffee machine to tell it what to do, first you need to get a code editor, which is your new paper, where you are going to write code on it. So, a code editor is a place where you are going to write code on it. Some of the very common code editor that people like to use is Visual Studio Code and Atoms. After you get the code editors, you can start writing your code in programming language, for example Java, Python, JavaScript or Ruby. This time, we have to write our codes in programming language instead of English. I will explain why in the next step. So after you write your code in programming language, you have to pass it to a translator, which is better known as a compiler. Compilers is also a piece of code, but it is a little bit more sophisticated, such that it is able to read your code. So it reads your codes, and what it do is it help you to translate your code into series of 0 and 1s, which we call it as a binary code or machine code. But these compilers, it only know programming language. It doesn't know English. And that is exactly the reason why we have to write our code in programming language instead of English. Because the compiler, who is going to help us to translate the code, only know programming language. After we get the binary code, we pass the binary code to the virtual machines, who is going to help us to read and execute the code. The virtual machine is also a piece of code, and it is very sophisticated as well, just like the compilers, because it can read the binary code. And what it does is it reads in the binary code, it understands what we wanted to do, and from there it tries to communicate with the electronics hardware of the coffee machines to control the coffee machines according to our instructions. However, this virtual machine only understands the machine code. However, the virtual machine who is going to help us to do the job only knows about machine code. And that is exactly the reason why we need to convert or translate our code from code in programming language into binary code. So after we have written the code into that machines, when we press on this button, the coffee machine will start to boil the water. When we press on the second button, the coffee machine will start to dispense the water. And yes, double success. So the general idea here is we start with code editors, we write code in programming language, we translate the code using compilers, and we read and execute the code using a virtual machines. And finally, we get what we get, a precious cup of coffees. So far, we have seen how to give instruction to Spider-Man and also how to give instructions to the coffee machines. You can also see how similar both processes are. For example, code editors is similar to paper, programming language is similar to English language. However, telling the coffee machine to do something for us requires one more step, which is to translate the code in programming language into binary codes using the compilers. Yes, that is the general idea of a coding process. Nice. So now, what if I want to develop a web application, a website for example? The same coding process follow. First, we grab a code editors, we write code using programming language, we pass the code through the translators to get the binary codes, and then we pass the binary code to the virtual machine to read and execute, and finally we get a working website. So now, if I want to build a website for example, the same coding process follows. First, we grab a code editors, then we write code in programming language, we pass the code we written into the compilers, help us to generate the binary code, and then we pass the binary code to the virtual machines, which will help us to read and execute. Finally, we get a full-fledged working website. However, in real world, the web browsers such as Google Chrome or Safari or Internet Explorer will help us to do the job as compilers and virtual machines. In short, you just have to remember that code is the instruction for the machine to do stuff. Whenever you want the machine to do stuff for you, you have to write codes for them. In short, in any coding process, you will have 5 steps altogether, from getting the code editors, to writing code in programming language, to translating code into binary code, and finally getting virtual machine to read and execute your code. And yes, this is the end of today's video. If you enjoyed the lesson and if you want to learn Java programming with me, please stay tuned to this channel. As this is my first ever videos on YouTube, If you have any feedbacks or any questions, feel free to tell me comment down below or message me at the CS Batman on Instagram. Thank you so much and see you next time.